Welcome back, Action Researchers. We are gearing up for week 6 and closing in on the final week of the class just around the corner. So this week's screencast will be brief, but I just want to take you through a couple of reflective pieces and also get what you need in place so that you can start working on the data analysis section as your data collection starts to come to fruition and you're starting to get some of those pieces of the project ready to go. So this week, let's begin by taking just a few minutes to talk through some reflections. I asked you to reflect and post into the discussion forum this week a little bit about the challenges and some of the success, but also maybe even some of the pinch points in developing and implementing your project. So I appreciate the good thought that's going into those reflections and what I've already seen posted this week. Keep up the good work. But I also wanted to draw your attention to the process that we've gone through in this class. Each semester I have several students, at least one or two, that will take a project-based approach to the action research and actually implement project-based learning or problem-based learning, trying to gear students into more active participation in problem solving and driving a greater sense of relevance into the learning environment. But I also want to parallel that process, and at this point in your cohort, you've probably already taken an instructional class on instruction or instructional strategies, effective practices. But thinking about what we have done with action research through the course of this semester, this term, you've basically implemented your own project-based learning about your own instruction. So if you think about it, we're kind of implementing a class within a class. You're focused on research and improving your practice, but we're also following a problem-based learning model as we go about building the action research project. So I'm going to move the screen a little bit. Unfortunately, there's some challenges with the screencast, and sometimes the video piece will cover up. But one of the things I want you to look at in the problem-solving cycle, and this works for students when you pull this into the classroom, is we started this 7-week course with the identification of a problem. I asked you to really think about, with the right questions activity, think about what really gets under your skin about either a classroom instruction or about a struggle for learning that really would become a great focus for you to try and tackle and solve through the action research this semester. So we began with identification of a problem. As you got into developing the research-based support for change, and even a little bit of that problem identification, it stepped you into the exploration field. You were exploring what effective practices had already been implemented through the research space that's already existing, and you used that to kind of hone in and set goals for yourself and your project work for action research this term. You also will begin thinking about some alternatives as you get into your research. You might be thinking about different directions that you could take with the project and the implementation, and even your practices in the future. As you really start looking at the effect of the interventions that you implement, and you receive some of the feedback from your students and the data that you have to look at, it will guide your practice, and you may find some alternatives that you want to try and tackle in the future. So ultimately, through the work and the exploration, the goal setting, and looking at alternatives, you're able to select your path. You moved in that selection phase, and now we're in the thick of implementation. And once we start looking at the data you've collected, you'll be doing some data analysis and some further reflection that gives you the evaluation stage. So really, I just wanted to draw that parallel for the process that we are undergoing in action research. We really truly are in a problem-based learning scenario for this course. So for those of you that are tackling problem-based learning and project-based learning as part of your intervention plan, you've got a course within a course within a course, if you will. But I just wanted to take a little bit of time to pull out the comparisons there. A couple of resources that I wanted to draw your attention to as well. Project Lead the Way and STEM follows these sequences very nicely. So if you're looking for additional resources to guide practice in the future, I would draw your attention there. The district that I work in is implementing a K-12 and soon to be pre-K-12 STEM learning path, and we are aligned with the Project Lead the Way national curriculum, which follows activity, project, and problem-solving structure. So students learn the base knowledge and skills through activities, and then they stair-step them into projects with a little bit more responsibility and active participation and getting more application. If you think about moving up Bloom's taxonomy, and then ultimately every unit of study completes with a problem solving or problem-based scenario that students have to figure out. They have to develop a solution to, and it may not always be a neat, tidy, clear-cut path to that solution. So it very much is about high levels of engagement, rigorous learning, high levels of relevance as students are tying basic concepts to real-world problem solving, and they ultimately are developing relationships through the work that they're doing, because it can't be done in isolation. It has to be done in a collaborative way. So communication skills are a big part of the success of the project. If you think about it, what we've done through this course, you've been engaged in your own practice, because really this project is truly about you and about your own growth as an educator, as an instructor, as a learning support for your students. And so it's been a pretty rigorous process, I hope you would agree, because as you got into identifying that problem, you had to get into the research base, and you really had to use the research base to guide you into effective practice and how you were going to tackle a viable solution or an intervention plan that had some research behind it to really look at improvement in your own practice. So through that you had high relevance, and then the relationship piece. I've talked quite a bit through the course and also individually as I provided feedback with you, but I've encouraged you to reach out with others in your learning community and not tackle projects like this alone, but use your colleagues either in your PLCs or in the staff room to really bounce ideas with and to help you further think about possibilities in your own environment. So it should be relational. An additional resource that I want to draw your attention to, and I've shared this with several of you in the course, is the Buck Institute. Buck has a whole research-based link because they are really focused on promoting project-based learning and problem-based learning throughout the profession. So they do a lot of great workshops for educators, but they also have a wealth of resources along the lines of research, evidence to support the use of problem-based learning in the classroom. So if it's something that you want to follow up in terms of implementing in your own practice, I just encourage you to check out several of those resources there for further information, and maybe that's another action research possibility for you down the road after the class. This week, we are going to focus in on, number one, you're continuing your data collection. So you should be in the thick of your project and actually implementing the intervention and starting to collect data. And we will try and draft the data analysis this week. Keep in mind you may be in the midst of data collection. That's okay. So again, it'll be a draft and you may have some holes in it, and just make notations that still collecting data along the way, and that'll be fine. Then we'll start to look at the discussion of results, and I would ask you to review Mertler Chapter 6 as a resource to support you in these areas. A couple of things this week, just a reminder of APA considerations. That's one of the things that I help with as I look at your drafts and I'm providing comments. I've noted where we've had maybe some APA citation styles that we needed to address and clean up, or basic formatting. One of the things that I continue to see is the flow back to I statements, I, me, and my. I really worked to implement a change in my practice this week or through this project. Mertler and I disagree a little bit on this one. I want you to keep it in a more formal sense. So take the I statements out, the me, my, eliminate those from the drafts. I'll give you, if I see it, I'll give you some suggestions for how you can easily switch that language around, but I do want you to keep it in a more formal sense for the research publication for Baker. And make sure you're writing the entire project in past tense. At the point now that you're starting to collect your data and you're going to write about your data, it's easier to keep it in past tense because you're writing about what you've already done, where in the first couple of weeks of the project you were writing about your current classroom and what you hope to achieve. And that was a little bit harder for all of us to stay in past tense, knowing that this all needed to flow together by the time you get to the end as a single document. So hopefully that all is starting to feel natural and it makes sense now, but make sure you go back through your previous sections and are looking for past tense throughout. So let's look where we're headed here in this week. As I said, you're going to be drafting the data analysis section of the narrative, and this week you may not be able to complete it because you're still collecting data. That's okay. You'll come back into it and have it cleaned up, finalized for week 7 when the final drafts will be due. You're going to start to work in the discussion of results. Once you have the data analysis in, then we'll get into discussion of results. So these two sections differ slightly. The data analysis section is only where you're reporting the data that you've collected. So you might have charts, you might have some figures, you might have some data tables, but you're only going to present the facts, what the data are that you have collected. The discussion of results is where you can have your interpretation. That's where you can reflect on things that you would have done differently or things that you hope to change in the future based on the results that you saw, the data that you present in the data analysis section. So try and keep it that way, and that's kind of the simplest way that I can explain it. Data analysis is the facts, discussion of results, that's where you get to have an opinion. So that's kind of the short of it, and I'll go through the guide in just a second. Dissemination of results and future directions. That's where you're going to talk about how you're not going to keep this as an isolated project, but you're going to share your work with others, and then what future steps you're going to take in the project, in the research, or your own practice. How has this influenced you? So that's the section that will follow for after data analysis and then the discussion of results. Then you'll write your dissemination of results and future direction. And then we're going to go back in week 7 and we're going to write your abstract, the short and sweet, very first part. So after you have a title page, your abstract section, which will be just one paragraph, about 250 words, short and sweet. What you did, how you did it, what results you achieved. Those 3 pieces, 250 words, just that short bite. And then you will be completed by week 7 and turning in the final project along with a presentation. And the presentation we'll go over as we get into week 7, and it's just an online piece that summarizes the project work. So let's look a little bit more about the data analysis methods for this week. So like I said, describing the data that you're collecting and stick to the facts. This is not where you interpret your results at all. You're going to save that for the discussion of results section. You need to think about how do you tell the reader whether or not your data are reliable and valid. So you can go and take a look at the discussion guide. I've given you some resources there. Let's see if we can pop that up really quick. So this is posted in Moodle for you, just kind of the guide. And each week that I do these are pulling the key pieces from the project rubric, so you can kind of follow these and know that you're meeting rubric criteria as well. They all are aligned. So I won't repeat. You see the facts are important. I've said that 3 times now. You present the data systematically. So how you set up your data in your data plan with tool 1, tool 2, tool 3, make sure it flows the same way. I gave some feedback on the data plan. So if you're talking about tool 1, it's a survey, you should include those survey questions. So as you present the data from the survey, make sure those survey questions are right there so that the reader can see the data and the results. You might even consider putting it in a table, and we'll look at some examples in just a minute. Utilize descriptive statistics. So that might just be, remember, we're not going into highly descriptive statistics and super complicated tests and analysis. You're just going to use basic descriptors like the mean, mode, and median, and N, and will represent your population sample that you're working with. Discussion of the reliability of results, and this is where I've pulled from another text resource, and it's just a real simple description of what reliability and validity concepts you would be addressing. So validity, you're really just talking about, to what degree the tool that you used for measurement is measuring what it's supposed to. So if you do a student survey, there's a fair description of validity, that it's measuring what it intended to, because you developed that survey for the purpose of this project to gather the students' feedback on the intervention that you ran. This isn't a tool that you found someplace else that was intended to measure something completely different. So in most cases, you just need to speak to why you believe the tool that you have used are valid. And then reliability is also discussed. We've got a lot on validity. So you'll also see reliable. So a valid test is always reliable, but a reliable test may not be valid. Basically, a test can measure consistency when it's what it's supposed to measure, but it may not be what the researcher intended it to measure. So a good example of that is, I think I've caught, and we've talked about individually when maybe you've got a data source that you were going to utilize, and I've asked the question, but how is that data source really going to tell you whether or not your intervention has brought about a change? So I think a good example would be, I had one student that was going to do a measure at the end of an instructional unit for mathematics. but there was no pre-assessment. So the tool that they were going to use to measure would have been used anyway in the classroom, but there was no comparison. There was no comparison to know whether the intervention was going to bring about a change, because you were only measuring the outcome of that one unit. And there was no way to identify whether or not the change in practice really made a difference from the learners, because there was no comparison to any other data. So that would not have been a reliable measure for the purpose of this research project. So just think about it. You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but I just want you to think about each one of the measures and whether or not they measured what they were supposed to, and whether or not you measured what you intended to measure. Was it an effective, was it a reliable measure? Could I have taken it and implemented it in the same way and had repeatable results? That's another way to think about reliability. So there is a resource for you as well in Moodle, and just that guide. Figures and tables. This is where I would love for you to take a look at how Mertler has laid out figures and tables for APA. Use them to present your data. It helps when you're reading through a project of this size. Whenever you can have a quick look and some type of graphical display or arrangement, even if you're taking survey data and you've got questions in one column and then you've got the percentage of responses laid out right next to it, it's a lot easier to look at and to quickly comprehend what the results were as you discuss them in this section. So here's a couple of examples of what that format would look like. So as you craft your data analysis section, you can refer to the pieces of information that you are presenting, and you can put in parentheses and designate a table. But the APA format for each of those is to table, identify with a numeric value, colon, and then include a title. So this is an example of how you might respond and provide survey data, and this is from a primary grade survey. So we've got our happy faces and our sad faces and our neutral, but that would be one way. And APA, again, always designate with a title and a numeric value, but then you tie the reader's attention to that by the parentheses and designating where it is in the text in that section that follows. So Mertler provides great examples in the text. I think I drew your attention to that last week in the screencast as well. Reporting on student data. Remove any student identification, black out the names, or you can refer to students with an alias or a number. So you might just do a simple student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or F1 for female, M1 for male, and so forth. And then identify the sample size or the number of respondents that are part of each of your data components. But make sure your data is anonymous. We don't want to identify any of your learners. So displaying data, just to sum up, this is kind of what I was getting at. The purpose of visual materials or other illustrations is really to enhance the audience understanding of information in the document or increase awareness of the topic. So whenever you can, present your data with a visual, whether it's a table or a figure. And note that in APA, a chart or a graph is designated as a figure, figure 1, figure 2, and so forth. And just make sure that whenever you can display the data in those graphical ways that you do so. So another sample. This is also illustrating how we anonymize the data. So this is a project where F1 or M1 for female or male students was designated. And this is how this particular project was presenting the change. So they implemented a pre-test score. This was looking at math fact fluency, and then a post-test score after the intervention occurred. And then you could quickly see in a table the degree of change. I guess it wasn't a percentage, but the number of points that were representing growth for each student. So it was a very clean way to present the data. You can also use charts and graphs and just, again, designate them as a figure in the project. So pull that back down a little bit so you can see how that worked. This is actually from my doctoral research where I looked at the presence of technology and non-technology in classrooms and looked at the number of office referrals after the project was implemented. And you can see there was a statistically significant difference in the level of learner engagement and staying on task because we did impact office referrals in that setting drastically. All right, here's another example. Again, figure how the data is displayed graphically. You'll also notice that with APA, you want to make sure that you're labeling all of your legends, all of your hash marks on the graph. And then again, you've got a title. All right, once we get the data analysis presented, and then you move into the discussion of the results, then a couple of key things that you want to look at. You want to look at the discussion of the data, and you also want to talk about any implications. So what did you learn from your data? What could others learn from the data? How is this really impacting the field? And what conclusions can you make? Any conclusions that you do make in the section, you would have to correlate back to the data and make sure that you're not just concluding something that's not supported. Tie in any research references and follow the APA citations. So when you get to that discussion of results section, you do want to go back to your research-based support for change, which was the second section that we wrote, and then pull in some of those references to substantiate what you did find. So hopefully you have a positive outcome in your research, and if not, that's okay too. Then we have the opportunity to talk about why that occurred and why it maybe wasn't as positive as you had hoped and what you would do differently or what change you would look for in the future. But bring in the research-based support for change again, and that's also part of the criteria for the project rubric in that discussion of results section. So you do have to have some citations to pull back together. So if you think about it, you started here, you've got your data, your research implemented, and as you discuss it, you want to pull the reader back in and kind of tie it all up as you prepare to conclude the project. What future implications do your data have for your instruction? So basically, what are you going to do now that you know what you know? And talk about any struggles or challenges. So I know that one of our classmates has dealt with some time out of the classroom taking care of a sick child, so that impacted the data and the way the intervention could flow. So that was a struggle for the project, and that's a real one, and that's okay to write about. You may also be part of data collecting, and maybe you identified a district assessment that hasn't yet been given, or you're not within the window of implementing, but you're going to watch that data. So that could be also a struggle with the timeline of the project, and that's fine to include that as well. So those are just a couple of examples that you can include for that discussion of results section that will follow your data analysis. Looking ahead into session 7, some of you may want to start working on this, and that's okay. I'll review anything that you turn in that you want me to give feedback on this week. So dissemination of results, that comes as one of the final pieces, the last piece of the project. So you're going to provide at least 2 clear examples for disseminating your results with a brief description of the audience. So those examples could be, presentation in a staff meeting or on a professional learning day in your district. You're also going to present the information to your cohort in the class, and you will be sharing your action research project as part of your portfolio review at Baker for meeting the master's degree criteria in order to graduate. I've had students that have gone on and presented during district level in-services across a grade level or a cohort of teachers in the district. I've also had several that have submitted and presented these at statewide or regional conferences. So just think about how you're going to share this out. And the whole objective of the dissemination plan is to just not keep it with you, but to share it out, because that's how we all get better. And then wrap up with some future directions you'll take or attempt to take with the research or interventions or any tools that you developed and implemented for the course. Before we close, I want to look at some of the formatting references just to shore up, making sure that you're using APA style. And I continue to use the Purdue Online Writing Lab reference site. And so if I see any areas that you need to improve, I usually put a direct link to that portion of the APA style, and I link you back to Purdue. So I'll continue to look for that, but you just adhere to the APA style whenever you can, as best you can, and we'll work together on it. You'll need to include a title page on the document. That includes your name, my name, the course, and date, and that's on the first page and centered in the page. I haven't seen any issue with double spacing the documents. You guys are all doing that. Make sure you're adhering to 1-inch margins, 12-point font, numbered pages, and that needs to be in the header of the document in the upper right corner. Make sure that research section has a minimum of 7 sources and that you include your references. I think everyone's got those in, but references at the end of the project. You'll insert a page break. So that's one of those handy skills that not everybody has or knows about, because I see people trying to return to get the references on a new page. And virtually every tool, whether you're using Google Docs or whether you're using Microsoft Word or another, even on the Mac side or Apple side if you're using Pages, look at your menu options, go to Insert Page Break, and that will force the page break, and then you don't have to mess with your returns or deleting to get it all on one page. So, handy tip for the week and how to use a word processing tool. If you have large data tools that you were not able to insert into your either data collection plan or data analysis, and you need to have those represented, then include those at the back of the project after references, do a page break, and include them as appendices for the project. So not everyone has the need for that because some of the data tools are very short and sweet, and you didn't need to have those included. But if you do have surveys or extensive assignments or even a self-created test, include that as an appendices to the document. All right, my friends, this week that wraps up kind of the nuts and bolts of the screencast for this week. Take a look at Moodle. You'll see that you've got the screencast posted. Edit the data collection plan drafts based on the feedback that you received from the previous week. Develop and submit your data analysis and discussion of results section. Continue to implement your research and collect your data. And if you want to continue to work in your peer review with your partner that we did in week 5, you're welcome to do so. So you've got that as an option. But this week you're going to do your screencast and submit the data analysis discussion of results section. That is it for us this week. I wish you the best in continuing your data collection. I look forward to reading your drafts. Have a great week.